The smell of bleach still makes my stomach turn. It takes me right back to that Tuesday morning when I stood in my own kitchen, holding a debit card that had just been declined at the grocery store, while my daughter-in-law, Jessica, smiled at me from across the counter and said the words that would change everything between us forever. "Well, Margaret, I guess you'll just have to get by." The bottle of bleach I'd been trying to buy for $2.37 sat there on the counter like evidence of my humiliation. I was 62 years old, and I couldn't afford cleaning supplies in my own home. But here's what Jessica didn't know that morning. Here's what she couldn't have possibly known as she stood there in my kitchen, wearing the diamond earrings I'd given her for Christmas, stirring her coffee with the silver spoon from my grandmother's set. The bank keeps records of everything, every transaction, every authorization, every single time someone adds or removes a name from an account. And when you've been banking at the same institution for 37 years, when you've paid your mortgage on time every month for 3 decades, when you've never bounced a check or missed a payment, well, they notice when something doesn't add up. They notice when a woman who's been managing her own finances since 1987 suddenly can't access her own money. They notice when someone who's never needed a cosigner, never needed help, never needed anyone to manage her affairs, suddenly has restrictions on her account that she didn't put there herself. And they really notice when the person who did put those restrictions there starts spending money in patterns that don't match the account holders. 37-year history with the institution. The morning it all fell apart started like any other Tuesday. I'd gotten up at 6:30, made my coffee, checked the weather, and written out my grocery list on the back of an envelope like I'd done every Tuesday for more years than I care to count. Bread, milk, eggs, ground turkey, those little cans of tomato paste I used for my meatloaf recipe, and yes, bleach, the same bleach I'd been buying for decades, the same brand, the same size bottle, nothing fancy, nothing extravagant, just the basics to keep my house clean and my family fed. I want you to understand something about me before this story goes any further. I've never been helpless, never been someone who needed taking care of. I raised 3 children as a single mother after their father decided he preferred his secretary's company to mine. I worked 2 jobs for 15 years, went to night school, bought my own house, paid my own bills. When my eldest son Michael brought Jessica home 6 years ago, I welcomed her with open arms. I was thrilled that my quiet, serious boy had found someone who made him laugh, someone who brought light into his world in ways I'd been praying for since he was a teenager. Jessica was everything I thought Michael needed: outgoing where he was reserved, confident where he was uncertain, social where he preferred solitude. She had opinions about everything, from the color of the bridesmaids' dresses to the best route to take to the grocery store. And at first, I found it charming. After years of pulling words out of my son like I was extracting teeth, here was someone who could make him talk, make him smile, make him engage with the world around him. The first time I noticed something was different was about 8 months after they got married. I was having some trouble with my online banking, couldn't remember my new password after the bank made everyone update their security information. Michael offered to help, and somehow, in the process of helping me reset my password, Jessica ended up with access to my accounts, just temporarily, she assured me, just until you get comfortable with the new system. She even helped me write down the new password in my address book, in that careful handwriting of hers that looked like she'd practiced penmanship in finishing school. It seemed reasonable at the time, helpful, even. Michael worked long hours at the engineering firm, and Jessica had flexible time at her marketing job. She could keep an eye on things, help me transition to the new online system, make sure I didn't get locked out again. And for a while, it worked beautifully. She'd call me when my credit card payment was due, remind me about automatic withdrawals, even helped me set up direct deposit for my Social Security check. You're so lucky to have someone who cares, my neighbor, Dorothy, said one afternoon as we sat on my front porch, watching Jessica wash my car in the driveway. My daughter-in-law can barely remember my birthday. Dorothy was right, of course. Jessica did care. She cared about my garden, my health, my finances, my social calendar. She cared so much that gradually, without me really noticing when or how it happened, she started caring for me instead of with me. The first real warning sign came in the form of a phone call from Dr. Patterson's office. I'd been going to the same family doctor for 20 years. Had my annual physical scheduled for the same week in March every year since I'd turned 60. But when I called to confirm my appointment, the receptionist told me there was a problem with my insurance. According to our records, Mrs. Henderson, your coverage was canceled last month. We have a note here that your daughter-in-law called to inform us you'd be switching to a different provider. I hung up the phone and stood in my kitchen, staring at the calendar on my refrigerator. March 15th was circled in red ink, my handwriting, just like every year, but apparently, my insurance was gone. When I called Jessica to ask about it, her explanation was smooth, practiced, like she'd been preparing for this conversation. "Oh, Margaret, I'm so sorry. I thought Michael told you. We found you a much better plan, much more affordable. The old one was costing you almost $300 a month, and this new one is only $150. You're saving a fortune." $300 a month. I'd been paying my insurance premiums for 2 decades, and I'd never paid anywhere near $300 a month. My actual premium was $97, automatically deducted from my checking account on the 15th of every month. I knew this because I balanced my checkbook religiously, wrote down every transaction, kept every receipt. But when I mentioned this to Jessica, she laughed that musical laugh of hers and shook her head. "Oh, sweetie, you're thinking of your supplement plan. Your main insurance was definitely $300, but don't worry about it now. Everything's taken care of." Everything was taken care of. That became Jessica's standard response to any question I had about my own finances. When I asked about a withdrawal I didn't recognize, everything was taken care of. When I noticed my grocery budget seemed tighter than usual, everything was taken care of. When my automatic savings deposits stopped appearing in my account, Jessica assured me with that patient smile of hers that everything was absolutely taken care of. The thing about gradual changes is that they're hard to pinpoint. One month you're buying name brand cereals, and the next month you're reaching for generic, but you tell yourself it's because you're being practical, not because you can't afford the extra $50. One month you're getting your hair done every 6 weeks, and the next month you're stretching it to 8, then 10, then 12. But you convince yourself it's because you're growing it out, not because the money isn't there anymore. I started keeping a notebook, just a small spiral-bound thing I picked up at the dollar store. Nothing fancy, but every time Jessica mentioned a bill she'd paid for me, every time she explained a transaction I didn't remember making, every time she assured me that something was taken care of, I wrote it down. Date, time, what she said, how much money was involved. At first, it was just curiosity. Then it became concern. Then it became something that kept me awake at night, adding numbers in my head and coming up with totals that didn't make sense. According to Jessica's careful explanations over the course of 6 months, I had apparently spent $1,200 on medical bills I couldn't remember receiving, $800 on home repairs I couldn't recall authorizing, and over $2,000 on what she called family emergencies that no one had bothered to tell me about. When I asked for receipts, for documentation, for anything that would help me understand where my money was going, Jessica's patience never wavered. "Margaret, you know how disorganized you've been getting lately. Michael and I are just trying to help you keep track of everything." Disorganized. That word hit me like a slap across the face. I'd been managing my own household, my own finances, my own life, for 4 decades. I'd raised 3 children, worked full-time, earned a degree, bought a house, survived a divorce, and somehow managed to save enough money to retire comfortably at 60. But according to my daughter-in-law, I was getting disorganized. The Tuesday morning when my card was declined, I was trying to buy 12 items that totaled $37.43. Bread, milk, eggs, ground turkey, canned tomatoes, pasta, onions, carrots, dish soap, paper towels, toilet paper, and that bottle of bleach. Basic necessities, nothing luxury. Nothing extravagant. The same things I bought every week, at the same store where I'd shopped for 15 years. The same store where I'd shopped for 15 years. But when I swiped my debit card, the machine made that horrible beeping sound that every adult dreads, and the screen displayed 2 words that might as well have been written in neon. Transaction declined. I tried again, thinking maybe I'd entered my PIN wrong. Same beep, same message. The cashier, a young man named Brandon who'd been checking me out for months and always asked about my garden, looked embarrassed. "Maybe try your credit card, Mrs. Henderson." So I did, and got the same result. 3 cards, 3 declines, and a growing line of customers behind me who were starting to look at their watches and shift their weight from foot to foot. "I'm so sorry," I said to Brandon, gathering up my purse and leaving my groceries on the conveyor belt. "I'll have to come back." The walk to my car felt like the longest walk of my life. My face was burning with embarrassment. My hands were shaking as I fumbled for my keys, and all I could think about was getting home before anyone else saw me like this. But Jessica was waiting for me when I walked in. She was sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and her laptop, looking perfectly comfortable and completely unsurprised to see me walk in empty. "Oh, did you forget something at the store?" she asked, not looking up from her screen. Her tone was casual, conversational, like we were discussing the weather. "My cards were declined," I said, setting my purse down on the counter with more force than necessary. "All three of them. I couldn't buy groceries, Jessica. I couldn't buy $37 worth of groceries." And that's when she looked up at me with those green eyes of hers, tilted her head to one side like she was studying a particularly interesting specimen, and delivered the line that still echoes in my head 2 years later. "Well, Margaret, I guess you'll just have to get by." The way she said it, so matter-of-fact, so dismissive, like my inability to buy food was a minor inconvenience rather than a crisis, told me everything I needed to know about how this conversation was going to go. But I tried anyway. I asked her about my accounts, about my cards, about the restrictions she'd mentioned in passing over the past few weeks, and with every question I asked, Jessica's explanations became more elaborate, more condescending, and more impossible to verify. According to Jessica, I'd been overspending for months. According to Jessica, I'd asked her to put limits on my accounts to help me stick to a budget. According to Jessica, the declined cards were for my own good, because I'd been making impulsive purchases and questionable financial decisions. When I asked for specifics, she pulled out a folder full of papers and started reading me a list of transactions that supposedly proved her point. March 3rd, Victoria's Secret, $87. I hadn't been inside a Victoria's Secret in 10 years. March 10th, GameStop, $123. I didn't even know what GameStop was. March 15th, DoorDash, $42. I'd never used a food delivery service in my life, but according to the bank statements Jessica showed me, I'd been busy spending money on lingerie, video games, and restaurant deliveries, while somehow forgetting every single purchase I'd made. "These aren't my transactions," I said, leaning forward to get a better look at the papers in Jessica's folder. But she closed the folder quickly and slid it back toward herself. "Margaret, I know this is confusing. Memory issues are more common than you think at your age. That's why Michael and I thought it would be best if I helped manage things for a while." Memory issues, there it was. The explanation that apparently made everything else make sense. I was 62 years old, therefore I was forgetting things. I was confused, therefore I needed help. I was making poor decisions, therefore someone else needed to make decisions for me. And if I questioned any of this, if I pushed back against Jessica's helpful management of my life, well, that just proved how confused I really was. But here's the thing about being told you have memory issues. It makes you start questioning everything. Did I ask for her help with my accounts? Was I really spending money on things I couldn't remember buying? Had I become the kind of person who needed someone else to manage her affairs? The doubt was poisonous, creeping into every corner of my mind and making me second-guess every thought, every memory, every instinct I'd relied on for 6 decades. I started writing everything down, not just the financial conversations with Jessica, but everything. What I ate for breakfast, what I watched on television, who I talked to on the phone, what bills came in the mail. If I was losing my memory, I was going to document exactly what I was losing and when. If I was making poor decisions, I was going to have a record of every decision I made. And if Jessica was right about my confusion, well, at least I'd have evidence of my own decline. But the strangest thing happened as I filled page after page of my notebook. Instead of documenting my failing memory, I was documenting inconsistencies in Jessica's stories, discrepancies between what she told me on Monday and what she told me on Wednesday, transactions she claimed I'd authorized that happened on days when I'd been with Dorothy, or at the library, or getting my hair cut, bills she'd paid for me that I couldn't find any record of ever receiving. 3 weeks after the grocery store incident, I got a call from my bank, not from the general customer service line, but from someone named Patricia Wilson, who introduced herself as a fraud prevention specialist. "Mrs. Henderson, I'm calling because we've noticed some unusual activity on your accounts that we'd like to discuss with you. Would it be possible for you to come in for a meeting this week?" Unusual activity. The words sent a chill down my spine, but also something else. Something that felt like hope. I made an appointment for the following Thursday, and for the first time in months, I didn't mention it to Jessica. I didn't tell Michael. I didn't tell anyone. I just wrote it down in my notebook and waited. Patricia Wilson was exactly the kind of person you'd want handling your financial security. Professional but warm, thorough but patient. and completely uninterested in treating me like I was too old or too confused to understand my own money. She spread my account records across her desk like she was assembling a puzzle, and what emerged was a picture that was both clearer and more disturbing than I'd been prepared for. Mrs. Henderson, I've been working in fraud prevention for 12 years, and I want you to know that what I'm about to show you is not your fault. You're the victim here, not the cause. She pointed to a series of transactions on my account statements, each one highlighted in yellow. These charges all have something in common. They were all made online or over the phone, using your account information. But they don't match your spending patterns from the previous 37 years of banking with us. 37 years of banking history. That's a lot of data, a lot of patterns, a lot of evidence about who I really was as a financial decision maker. And according to Patricia, the person who'd been spending my money for the past 8 months was not the same person who'd been responsibly managing her finances since 1987. The Margaret Henderson who's been banking with us since 1987 doesn't shop online very often. And when she does, it's for practical items, garden supplies, home maintenance, maybe a book or two. The Margaret Henderson who's been using your accounts since last fall has spent over $8,000 at retail stores you've never shopped at before, restaurants in cities you've never visited, and subscription services you've never used. $8,000. As Patricia walked me through the transactions, highlighting each questionable charge, explaining each discrepancy, showing me patterns I'd never noticed, the number kept growing. 8,000 became 10,000, then 12,000, then 15,000. $15,000 of my money, spent by someone who wasn't me, on things I'd never wanted, at places I'd never been. Who has access to your accounts, Mrs. Henderson? Patricia asked, though something in her tone suggested she already had a good idea of the answer. When I told her about Jessica's helpful assistance with my online banking, about the password reset, about the gradual transition from helping me to helping herself, Patricia nodded like she'd heard this story before. Unfortunately, this type of financial abuse is more common than most people realize, especially when it involves family members. The victim trusts the perpetrator completely, so they don't notice the signs until significant damage has been done. And because the perpetrator has legitimate access to the accounts, it's often difficult to prove that the spending wasn't authorized. Financial abuse, the term hit me like a physical blow. I'd been thinking of Jessica's behavior as controlling, maybe manipulative, possibly dishonest, but abuse. That word carried implications I wasn't sure I was ready to face. Abuse suggested victimization, and I'd never thought of myself as anyone's victim. Abuse suggested systematic harm, and I'd been telling myself that Jessica was just trying to help, even if her help had gotten out of hand. But as Patricia continued explaining the pattern of transactions, the methods used to hide the spending, the psychological tactics commonly employed by financial abusers, I realized that what I'd been calling help was actually something much more sinister. Jessica hadn't gradually taken control of my finances to protect me from my own poor judgment. She'd systematically isolated me from my own money while convincing me that the isolation was for my own good. What can I do? I asked Patricia, though I was afraid of the answer. $15,000 was gone, spent on someone else's desires while I was standing in grocery stores with declined cards. Could I get it back? Could I prove that I hadn't authorized the spending? Could I make sure this never happened again? Patricia handed me a business card with the name and number of an attorney who specialized in elder law and financial crimes. This is Emily Chen. She's handled cases like yours before, and she's very good at what she does. But I want you to understand something, Mrs. Henderson. The legal process is going to be complicated, and it's going to take time. Jessica had legitimate access to your accounts, which means proving unauthorized use is going to require documentation, evidence, and probably testimony from people who can verify your actual spending habits and mental capacity. Documentation, evidence, testimony. The words sounded overwhelming, but they also sounded like hope. I'd been documenting Jessica's inconsistencies for weeks without really knowing why. I'd been keeping track of conversations, saving receipts, writing down dates and times and amounts. What had started as an attempt to monitor my own memory had become something else entirely, a record of someone else's lies. That night, I spread every piece of paper I'd collected over the past 6 months across my dining room table. Bank statements, receipts, my notebook full of conversations with Jessica. the folder of evidence she'd shown me to prove my impulsive spending, and for the first time in months, the picture that emerged made perfect sense. The Victoria's Secret charges corresponded exactly to the dates when Jessica had mentioned needing new clothes for work events. The GameStop purchases aligned with Michael's birthday and Christmas, when Jessica had been shopping for gifts for her nephew. The DoorDash charges clustered around evenings when Jessica had mentioned being too tired to cook after long days at the office. She hadn't been spending my money randomly or impulsively. She'd been using my accounts as her personal expense account, funding her lifestyle while simultaneously convincing me that I was too confused and irresponsible to manage my own finances. Every time I'd questioned a transaction, she'd provided an explanation that shifted the blame back to me. Every time I'd asked for documentation, she'd produced papers that supposedly proved my own incompetence. Every time I'd pushed back against her control, she'd tightened the restrictions and told me it was for my own good. I called Emily Chen the next morning. Her voice was confident and reassuring, and she asked me to bring all my documentation to her office for a consultation. "Mrs. Henderson, I want you to know that you've done exactly the right thing by keeping detailed records. Most victims of financial abuse don't realize what's happening until it's too late to gather evidence. The fact that you've been documenting everything gives us a strong foundation to work with." Victims. There was that word again, but this time it didn't feel like a judgment or a weakness. This time, it felt like a recognition of reality. I was the victim of a crime, not the cause of a family misunderstanding. Jessica hadn't been helping me, she'd been robbing me, and the confusion and self-doubt I'd been experiencing weren't signs of memory loss or mental decline. They were the natural result of psychological manipulation designed to make me question my own perceptions. Emily Chen's office was exactly what you'd expect from a successful attorney: polished, organized, filled with law books and certificates and the kind of furniture that suggested competence and trustworthiness. But Emily herself was warmer than I'd expected, more personal, more willing to treat me like a person rather than just another case file. "Tell me about your relationship with Jessica before this started," she said, leaning back in her chair and giving me her full attention. "I need to understand the baseline, the normal dynamic between you two, so I can explain to a judge how dramatically things changed once she gained access to your accounts." So I told her about the Jessica I'd first met 6 years ago, the confident, outgoing woman who'd made my son laugh and helped me reset my banking password, the helpful daughter-in-law who'd reminded me about bill due dates and offered to run errands when I was busy, the caring family member who'd worried about my health, my safety, my financial security. "Classic grooming behavior," Emily said when I finished describing Jessica's gradual transition from helper to controller. "Financial abusers don't start with theft. They start with helpfulness, with concern, with small favors that establish trust and access. Once they have access, they begin testing boundaries, small withdrawals, minor purchases, little restrictions that they frame as being for your benefit. If you don't notice or don't object, they escalate." Grooming, another word I'd never applied to my situation, but it fit perfectly. Jessica had groomed me for financial abuse, the same way predators groom children for other forms of exploitation. She'd established trust, gained access, tested boundaries, and escalated her control gradually enough that I'd barely noticed what was happening until it was too late to stop it easily. "What's our next step?" I asked Emily, though part of me was afraid of the answer. Taking legal action against Jessica meant confronting Michael, meant potentially destroying my relationship with my son, meant admitting to my friends and neighbors that I'd been foolish enough to let someone steal from me for months without realizing what was happening. Emily pulled out a legal pad and started writing down a list of actions we'd need to take. "First, we're going to contact your bank and have all of Jessica's access to your accounts terminated immediately. Then we're going to change all your passwords, all your security questions, and all your account numbers. We're going to document every unauthorized transaction and file a police report for theft and fraud. And then we're going to present Jessica with a choice: pay back what she stole voluntarily, or face criminal charges." Criminal charges. The phrase sent a chill through me, not because I was afraid of Jessica facing consequences for her actions, but because I was afraid of what those consequences might mean for my family. Michael loved his wife. He trusted her completely, defended her constantly, relied on her for everything from managing their household to navigating social situations. How was I going to tell my son that the woman he'd chosen to build his life with was a thief? But Emily was already anticipating my concerns. "Mrs. Henderson, I understand that this is complicated because Jessica is family, but I need you to understand something. What she's done to you is a felony. She's stolen $15,000 from you, while simultaneously convincing you that you're mentally incompetent. That's not a family misunderstanding or a financial disagreement. That's a crime. And it's a crime that will continue until someone stops it. She was right. Of course, Jessica hadn't stolen my money out of desperation, or because she'd made a single poor decision. She'd systematically exploited my trust and affection, used my love for my son as a weapon against me, and convinced me that my victimization was actually my own fault. And if I didn't stop her, if I prioritized family harmony over justice, she'd keep doing it until there was nothing left to steal. The meeting with Patricia Wilson to close Jessica's account access was surprisingly quick and efficient. Within an hour, every account number had been changed, every password had been reset, and every automatic payment had been updated. Jessica would wake up tomorrow morning with no access to my money and no ability to monitor my financial activity. For the first time in months, my finances were completely private again. But I knew Jessica wouldn't accept this change quietly. She'd built her lifestyle around my money, and she'd invested too much effort in convincing me of my own incompetence to give up her control without a fight. Emily had warned me to expect pushback, retaliation, and escalation. Financial abusers don't surrender their victims willingly, she'd said. Jessica is going to try to regain control, and when that doesn't work, she's going to try to punish you for taking control back. The call came that evening, less than 12 hours after I'd left the bank. Jessica's voice was tight with anger, though she was trying to maintain her usual tone of helpful concern. Margaret, I got a very disturbing call from the bank today. They said you've changed all your account information and removed my access. I'm worried that someone might be taking advantage of you, maybe pressuring you to make decisions that aren't in your best interest. Someone taking advantage of me. The irony was so thick I almost laughed out loud, but instead, I took a deep breath and delivered the line Emily had helped me practice. Jessica, I've discovered that there have been unauthorized transactions on my accounts, and I've taken steps to protect myself. If you'd like to discuss this further, you can contact my attorney. The silence on the other end of the phone stretched long enough that I wondered if she'd hung up. When Jessica finally spoke again, her voice had changed completely. Gone was the patient, condescending tone she'd been using with me for months. In its place was something cold, calculating, and genuinely frightening. Margaret, I think you need to be very careful about the accusations you're making. Michael and I have been nothing but helpful to you, and if you start spreading lies about us, there will be consequences. Legal consequences. Michael has been documenting your increasing confusion and memory problems for months, and we have witnesses who can testify to your declining mental state. Do you really want to go down this road? Threats, intimidation, gaslighting. Everything Emily had predicted was happening exactly as she'd said it would. Jessica was trying to regain control through fear, making me believe that defending myself would result in even worse consequences than continuing to be victimized. But I was prepared this time. I had documentation, legal representation, and most importantly, I had clarity about what was really happening. Jessica, as I said, any further communication about this matter should go through my attorney. Her name is Emily Chen, and her office will be in touch with you soon. And then, I hung up the phone, my hands shaking but my voice steady. The retaliation started the next day. Michael called me 3 times, each conversation more emotional than the last. According to him, Jessica was devastated by my accusations, hurt by my lack of trust, and confused by my sudden hostility towards someone who'd done nothing but try to help me. He'd been hearing about my memory problems and financial confusion for months, and he was worried that I was being manipulated by people who didn't have my best interests at heart. Mom, Jessica showed me the records of all the help she's given you, the bills she's paid, the mistakes she's corrected, the problems she's solved, and now you're accusing her of stealing from you. It doesn't make sense. You're not thinking clearly about this. My own son, convinced that I was the problem. My own child, defending the woman who'd been systematically stealing from his mother for 8 months. The pain of Michael's betrayal was almost worse than the financial theft itself, because it meant Jessica had succeeded in turning my family against me. She'd isolated me not just from my money, but from my son's love and support. But Emily had prepared me for this too. Family members often side with the abuser initially, she'd explained. The abuser has had months or years to shape their perception of the situation, while you're just now revealing the truth. It takes time for people to process the reality of what's been happening, especially when accepting that reality means acknowledging that they were fooled along with you. The police report was filed on a Friday morning at the downtown precinct. Detective Sarah Morrison took my statement, reviewed my documentation, and explained the next steps in the investigation. Mrs. Henderson, I want you to know that this is an excellent case for prosecution. You have clear evidence of unauthorized access, detailed records of fraudulent transactions, and a well-documented pattern of psychological manipulation. The district attorney's office takes financial elder abuse very seriously. Elder abuse, another phrase I was still getting used to, another label that felt both accurate and surreal. I was a victim of elder abuse at 62, not because I was particularly elderly or vulnerable, but because someone I trusted had chosen to exploit my age and family relationship for financial gain. The crime wasn't about my limitations. It was about Jessica's greed and lack of conscience. The confrontation came on a Tuesday morning exactly 3 weeks after I'd first met with Emily Chen. Jessica arrived at my house unannounced, letting herself in with the key I'd forgotten she still had, and found me drinking coffee at my kitchen table. She looked different than I'd ever seen her before, tired, angry, and desperate in a way that made her seem almost like a stranger. "Margaret, we need to talk," she said, sitting down across from me without being invited. "This has gone far enough. You're destroying our family, over money, over misunderstandings, over things that can be explained if you'd just listen to reason." But I wasn't. The same woman who'd stood humiliated in a grocery store 3 weeks earlier. I wasn't the confused, self-doubting person Jessica had been manipulating for months. I was someone who'd done her homework, documented the truth, and surrounded herself with professional support. I was someone who finally understood what had really been happening in my own life. "Jessica, you stole $15,000 from me," I said quietly. "You used my own trust against me, convinced me I was losing my memory, and made me question my own judgment while you spent my money on your lifestyle. That's not a misunderstanding, that's a crime." She tried everything then. Tears, anger, bargaining, threats. She told me I was paranoid, vindictive, senile, and cruel. She promised to pay me back if I'd just drop the charges and stop humiliating her. She warned me that Michael would never forgive me for destroying his marriage. She accused me of being jealous of her relationship with my son, but nothing she said could change the numbers on the bank statements or the evidence in Emily's files. Nothing she could promise would give me back the months of self-doubt and confusion she'd deliberately created. And nothing she could threaten would be worse than continuing to live as her victim. The court hearing was held on a gray Thursday morning in November, in a courtroom that smelled like old wood and disappointment. Jessica sat at the defendant's table with her attorney, looking small and fragile in a way that was probably calculated to generate sympathy. Michael sat in the gallery behind her, his face a mask of pain and confusion that broke my heart every time I looked at him. Emily presented our case methodically and thoroughly. The bank records showing unauthorized transactions, the testimony from Patricia Wilson about spending patterns that didn't match my 37-year history, the documentation I'd kept of Jessica's lies and manipulations, the expert testimony about financial elder abuse and psychological manipulation. Jessica's attorney tried to paint me as a confused elderly woman who'd authorized all the spending and then forgotten about it due to memory problems. But our evidence was too strong, our documentation too complete, our witnesses too credible. The judge listened carefully, asked pointed questions, and took very little time to reach her decision. "Mrs. Henderson, the court finds that you were the victim of systematic financial abuse perpetrated by someone in a position of trust. The defendant will be required to make full restitution of the stolen funds, plus interest and court costs. Additionally, the defendant will be placed on probation for 3 years and will be prohibited from having any access to your financial accounts or information. Restitution, probation, legal recognition that I'd been telling the truth, that I'd been victimized, that Jessica's helpful concern had actually been criminal exploitation. The relief I felt was almost overwhelming, not just because of the financial recovery, but because of the validation. I wasn't confused, paranoid, or vindictive. I was a victim who'd fought back and won. But victory in court doesn't automatically repair the relationships that financial abuse destroys. Michael struggled for months to reconcile the woman he'd married with the woman who'd been convicted of stealing from his mother. Jessica blamed me for destroying her life and refused to acknowledge that she'd done anything wrong. The family gatherings that had once been sources of joy became strained. Awkward affairs where everyone walked on eggshells around topics that used to be simple conversation. The money came back slowly, in monthly payments that Jessica resented and delayed whenever possible. But more important than the financial recovery was the personal recovery, the restoration of my confidence in my own judgment, my trust in my own perceptions, my belief in my own competence. I was no longer someone who needed taking care of. I was someone who'd taken care of herself when it mattered most. 6 months after the court hearing, I got a call from Patricia Wilson at the bank. "Mrs. Henderson, I wanted to let you know that we've identified 2 other cases similar to yours, both involving daughters-in-law who gradually gained access to their mothers-in-law's accounts and then began unauthorized spending. Your documentation and evidence have been crucial in helping us recognize the pattern and protect other potential victims." Other victims. The realization that Jessica had targeted me, not randomly but systematically, that my experience was part of a recognizable pattern of financial predation, was both disturbing and validating. I wasn't uniquely vulnerable or uniquely foolish. I was someone who'd trusted a family member and had that trust exploited, just like thousands of other people every year. Today, almost 2 years later, I manage my own finances completely. I do my own online banking, pay my own bills, and make my own financial decisions. I shop for groceries every Tuesday morning, buying whatever I need without checking my account balance first or worrying about declined cards. I've never had another transaction that I couldn't explain or another charge that surprised me. The smell of bleach still takes me back to that morning when Jessica smiled and told me I'd have to get by. But now it reminds me of strength rather than humiliation. It reminds me that I survived systematic psychological manipulation and financial theft. It reminds me that I documented the truth when everyone else believed the lies. It reminds me that I fought back when fighting back seemed impossible. Michael and I are slowly rebuilding our relationship. Jessica is no longer part of our lives, and while that creates its own sadness, it also creates space for honesty, authenticity, and genuine connection. He's learning to understand how sophisticated financial abusers can be, how they exploit love and trust as weapons, how they convince entire families that their victims are the real problem. If you're listening to this and something about my story sounds familiar, if someone in your life has gradually taken control of your finances while convincing you it's for your own good, if you've started questioning your own memory and judgment about money you know you didn't spend, please understand this: you are not confused, paranoid, or incompetent. You are potentially the victim of a crime. Document everything. Write down conversations. Save receipts. Keep records of who has access to your accounts and when they got that access. Find someone you trust completely, someone who has no financial interest in your situation, and share your concerns with them. Contact your bank. Speak to a fraud prevention specialist. Ask questions about unusual activity on your accounts. And if you discover that someone you trusted has been stealing from you, remember that their betrayal of your trust is not a reflection of your judgment. It's a reflection of their character. You did nothing wrong by being generous, helpful, and trusting. The crime is theirs, not yours, and you deserve justice, restitution, and the right to manage your own life. I want you to save this story if it resonates with you. Share it with someone who might need to hear it. Send it to a friend or family member who's been expressing confusion about their finances or doubts about their own memory. Sometimes we need permission to trust our instincts, and sometimes we need someone else's story to help us recognize our own truth. The bank found out her name, just like the title of this story promised. But more importantly, I found out my own strength. I found out that being victimized doesn't make you a victim forever. I found out that fighting back is possible, even when the fight seems overwhelming, even when your own family questions your judgment, even when the person who hurt you tries to convince everyone that you're the real problem. Where are you listening to this from? Are you at home, maybe questioning some financial irregularities you've noticed? Are you in your car, thinking about someone in your life who's been helping with your money? Are you walking somewhere, wondering if you're overreacting to situations that make you uncomfortable? I want to hear from you in the comments. I want to know if my story helped you recognize your own situation, or gave you courage to ask the questions you've been afraid to ask. Hit that like button if this story helped you understand something new about financial abuse or family manipulation. Subscribe to my channel if you want to hear more stories about fighting back against people who exploit trust and love for personal gain. And please Please share this with someone who needs to hear it. You never know whose life you might save by helping them recognize that their confusion isn't confusion at all. It's clarity trying to break through someone else's lies. My name is Margaret Henderson. I'm 64 years old now, and I manage my own money. I buy my own groceries, pay my own bills, and make my own decisions. And that bleach I was trying to buy for $2.37, I bought a whole case of it the day after the court hearing. Not because I needed that much bleach, but because I could. Because my money was mine again, and my life was my own again. And nobody would ever again have the power to smile at me and tell me to just get by.